Anin Bojo, Mino de Bishkat, Kerry-Ann Charles Dishtikosh, Georgina Island Dunjiba, Mayangan Dodam, Anishna Bekwa and Dow, Beandagan. Hello, good evening. My name is Kerry-Ann, and I'm a member of the Georgina Island First Nation. I'm a member of the Wolf Clan, and I'm a proud Anishinaabe woman. I'm also a proud member of the Williams Treaties First Nations, and I'm speaking to you this evening from my traditional territory. Welcome. I'm the partnership coordinator for Cambrian Indigenous Professional Services, or as we like to call ourselves, SIPS, which is a First Nation owned and operated environmental consulting organization whose staff are uniquely all Indigenous. I've been with SIPS since September 17, but as Andrew had mentioned, have had and been very privileged to work in my own community for 17 plus years in various capacities. Throughout these various responsibilities, I've been fortunate and grateful to work on several projects that promote and encourage and assist to ensure community engagement, partnerships, and collective actions are being taken that protect and preserve that which sustain us all. This includes assisting to ensure that the Indigenous voices are being actively and meaningfully incorporated into the decision-making processes, as well as policies and the plans for our collective future. This evening, I've been asked to briefly speak about the benefits of incorporating First Nations and/or Indigenous perspectives into a multidisciplinary approach to watershed management. This is a huge conversation, and we have very little time to undertake such a big task. So I've decided to spend this time introducing you to 7 key concepts that I hope will help you see the benefits without me having to go into much detail about the benefits themselves. And they are as follows: relationship, natural law, 7 generations, traditional ecological knowledge, two-eyed seeing, ethical space, and contrasts and values. The first concept that I'll briefly go over is the concept of relationships. And both Mark and Jack's presentation, relationship was spoken about a lot. They are fundamental to our very existence and is a concept that is well understood by Indigenous peoples around the world and extend to our natural environment. For many, land means property, the water, the air, and all that live within these ecosystems. But for Indigenous people, land means more than property. It encompasses traditions, culture, social systems, spirituality, ecosystems, responsibility, relationships, and law. Indigenous peoples and those within community particularly have a permanence and an understanding of that land that they call home that is place-based. They have an intimate relationship with, as well as a responsibility to, the land and waters, and believe to have been gifted by the Creator the understanding for achieving what we call Minopamwadzwin, or the good life, which is living in peace, balance, and harmony. The good life is believed to be achieved through adhering to what is known to the Anishinaabe and other Indigenous peoples as the Creator's law or natural law. This law encompasses the understanding of respectful, reciprocal relationships with each other, and more importantly, with our natural environment. With this understanding, it is hoped that you can start to get an appreciation of why including Indigenous perspectives and values in watershed management could be beneficial and would be beneficial to all. That leads me into the second concept that I'd like to speak with you about, which is the Creator's law or natural law. Simply put, can be defined as all things are regarded as beings. Plants, trees, animals, insects, rocks, and the unforeseen forces of nature are all considered beings. Indigenous peoples' regard for life is one that recognizes the value of all life, of all beings. We are all related to one another as we all have the same and shared mother. Thus, we are all responsible for maintaining good and harmonious relationships for our next 7 generations. Indigenous peoples followed this law for millennia, and the outcomes and effects were abundant, thriving biological diversity. We are the understanding that humans are part of and must remain in balance with ecosystems. There's a real personal connection to those beings that do not have voices and who are the ones that sustain us. Therefore, our responsibility to the land and water differs from the non-Indigenous peoples. From this place of connection, knowing and understanding, we have the knowledge around how interactions can and will have ripple effects if relationships are not considered. The next concept that I'm going to touch on is the 7 generations principle. It's an ancient Iroquois philosophy which reflects the decisions we make today should result in a sustainable world 7 generations into the future. This philosophy takes into consideration that the land we walk upon today is not ours, but is actually being borrowed from those who have yet to be born. I'm often questioned about what exactly the 7 generations means as it pertains to time, and myself could not really clearly articulate that until I attended a conference that one of my mentors and somebody that I look up to immensely, Henry Lickers, was the keynote speaker at. Henry is a member of the Akwesasne First Nation. And this was a slide that he presented, much similar to this one, not exactly this one, but to me really visualizes what that concept of 7 generation looks like. So you can picture yourself here in the middle. But all of these relations, there are actually 7 generations that in your time, you can actually be in contact with, which is your great-grandmother and your grandmother and your mother, which produces you. And then of course, your child and your grandchild and your great-grandchild. So those are the 7 generations. And that for me, when I seen this from Henry's keynote, really I was able to visualize what that concept of 7 generations looks like. So in the context of watershed management, this concept is now more important than ever to ensure that this way of thinking is not just an Indigenous way of thinking, but a way of thinking that embraces all human beings in order to ensure the health and well-being of all who share and are sustained by Mother Earth and our life-giving waterways. The inclusion of traditional ecological knowledge or indigenous traditional knowledge, as Mark has referenced it to, has a huge benefit that are finally starting to be acknowledged and are in many variations of the definition, such as this one. Traditional ecological knowledge presents a rich fabric of knowledge and wisdom that relates directly to environmental stewardship, preservation, and the enhancement of biological diversity by the First Peoples of Turtle Island. One of the things that is overlooked by many when people speak about traditional ecological knowledge or Indigenous traditional knowledge is the fact that it is place-based and are observations that have been passed down from generation to generation. These observations have been done over time within a community, and being such may differ greatly to observations in other communities. Western science differs from traditional ecological knowledge because there is a time-limited observation process, and science usually requires a quantitative validation and is often believed and considered valid once written down into textbooks. Whereas traditional ecological knowledge is knowledge that is embedded with Indigenous ways of knowing and through observations over a long period of time are shared orally. Understanding that TEK is culturally based as well as place specific is extremely important, especially when we're undertaking watershed management, as each community or Indigenous peoples will have their own views, knowledge, and values, but each also hold valuable information about the past to the present that will assist us in making robust plans for our collective future. As mentioned, the acknowledgement of the value and benefits of TEK and the Indigenous perspectives have just recently started to be recognized. And along with that recognition, there are some fairly new concepts that are being brought to the forefront to assist in ensuring that opportunities are being created for non-Indigenous peoples to listen and learn from Indigenous communities and peoples, but also to ensure that perspectives and knowledge are being heard and meaningfully included. I'll speak to these in the next 2 slides. So this first one, Mark has mentioned in his slide, and it's called two-eyed seeing. So two-eyed seeing is learning to see from one eye with the strength of Indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing, and from the other eye with the strength of Western and or scientific knowledge and ways of knowing, while learning to use both of these eyes together for the benefit of all. This concept encompasses Indigenous ways of thinking, which recognizes that everyone is born with a gift, and collectively, those gifts must be drawn upon to support the whole. Pre-contact, as a community, we depended on each other for survival, and this holds true today. The environment has no borders, and this was also mentioned in the previous two presentations, including our streams and rivers. So we must recognize moving forward that the Western ways of identifying solutions to problems and our planning is not the only way, and create and ensure opportunities are being made to meaningfully include and embed the Indigenous perspectives and knowledge into solutions and plans for our future. Ethical space is another concept that is newly being promoted. An ethical space is the ethical space of engagement processes. Sorry, the ethical space of engagement proposes a framework as a way of examining the diversity and positioning of Indigenous peoples in Western society. In the pursuit of a relevant discussion on Indigenous legal issues, and particularly to the fragile intersections of Indigenous law and Canadian legal systems. So this is another concept that is being brought to the forefront to ensure the Indigenous voices are not only being listened to, but heard, as well as meaningfully and intentionally included into all environmental work moving forward. This concept really starts to look at the imbalances that have been intentionally created and how we can start to decolonize and make space for the Indigenous governance structures, some of which I've indicated previously in this presentation, such as the Creator's Law. This also starts to highlight the legal implications of First Nations governance on policy and the inherent rights and treaty rights of Indigenous peoples that have been blatantly suppressed. Like all the concepts that I've highlighted this evening, the creation of ethical space will not just benefit the Indigenous communities peoples, but will also benefit the whole of society and to help to address the inequalities and injustices that we are currently facing around the world. I wanted to end my overview of the key concepts with this particular slide, as I think it is important to identify and understand some of the ways in which we think differently so that you can start to reflect on your approaches as we move forward incorporating Indigenous perspectives into multidisciplinary approaches to watershed management. These differences in values give the Indigenous peoples the insight and connection to the land and water and can hopefully help you understand why this may be. The links between ecosystems, global ecological change, and the health and well-being of human communities is just that, connected. It is important now, more than ever, to engage, partner, and act collectively to ensure the healthy future of our next 7 generations. And from my perspective, actively seeking out, making space, and including the Indigenous voices and perspectives will not just benefit the Indigenous peoples, but in fact, assist in making the world a better place for all of us, including those other beings that are not of the human form. Before I wrap up, I wanted to take you back in time a little to when you were in public school. I believe it's grade 3 that we are all introduced to this very important concept of the web of life and taught about the importance of all the species having a role to play to ensure a healthy ecosystem, and in turn, how that affects our health as humans. It's unfortunate that this lesson loses its importance and becomes forgotten as we become adults and pursue what is ingrained in us to be the good life, meaning getting a good education so that we can get the great paying job and buy a big house, drive a nice car, and be able to buy all that great stuff. Very contrasting to the Indigenous meaning of Minopamadzwin, or the good life. The point that I really wanted to make in bringing you back to this public school lesson is that the foundation for the web is water, or Nabi, which is often not given the respect and gratitude it deserves, and it's often, quite frankly, taken for granted. It is hoped that the introduction to these 7 key concepts will help us to break down the barriers that are currently in place to assist us in moving forward and towards a multidisciplinary approach to watershed management. These are the 7 grandfather teachings, and we're told that if we strive to follow these 7 simple principles every day, balance and harmony will be restored, and Minopamadzwin will be achieved for all. As I end, I wanted to leave you with this message. The earth does not belong to man, man belongs to the earth. All things are connected like the blood that unites us all. Man did not weave the web of life, he is merely a strand in it. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself. Chmiigwech.